Thank you for having me, and thank you for this introduction. Yes, Laimonas. Yeah, actually, my first debut album is on the way. So, and my artist name is Tadeja. So please hit in a couple of weeks, probably. It takes some time with these platforms and in a digital world, which Radio ETER is part of as well. As Laimonas mentioned, Radio ETER, and that's an important part of its context, is that it is a part of youth center. So one of the main youth centers in Slovenia, and it's a public institution. So that's the context of it. Yeah. Um, and what is it actually? Radio Ether is podcast platform for young people, and it's actually the place where young people can come and actually in real life experience what it means to make a podcast. Yeah, I think that's a very important thing. Yeah, so that we are a space where this thinking about podcast actually can come in place and give a first-hand experience. It's also an important part of Radio Ether that we run it as, let's say, education program that is based on learning by doing. Yeah, so it's learning by doing how we run it. But it wasn't always like that. So in the year 2020, when the Radio Ether actually was established, was the initial idea that came from youth initiative, which you that work in youth work, the youth sector, you know what that means, I'm sure. Yeah, so it was like 5, 6 young people who actually had that idea of having their own radio station. And one of these, they were actually students, most of them, like journalism or humanistic studies students. And one of them was also a volunteer or a student volunteer in the youth center. That's how, I think it's also an important thing, that's how they knew about the youth initiatives. Yeah. And there was a youth worker who had the background in media and was able actually to support them to apply for the youth initiative and actually got approved. And that was in 2020. At that time, Radio Ether was actually called Radio Basement because that was the nickname of the youth center where it all started. But the approach was really serious and professional to the program and the whole idea, which meant that Young Dragons also registered the radio as a media in Slovenia. So it's officially registered as a media. And then it meant that it couldn't hold the English name Basement. That's how the name then changed, yeah, from Basement to Radio Ether. That's just like, now I laugh at that, but yeah, that was the obstacle that suddenly appeared, yeah. No, and as you probably have experience with youth initiatives, you also know that they have a certain limitations, which is young people's lives, which means that life is happening and the interests are shifting to other stuff. So all of a sudden, this youth initiative was questionable, you know. So some of the students went to study abroad, some of them found other interests. So all of a sudden, there was no core team or core group that would actually run it. And Young Dragons, they knew that, you know, having a platform, the media platform for young people's voices, it's important, and they wanted to keep it, and they were wondering how to make it sustainable. And as Laimonas mentioned, I work with Young Dragons as a communication strategist, and actually they asked me if I would tap into the sour apple, as they called it, you know. So it was, to me, that was a fantastic excitement. One thing is that I love microphones. So never invite me to your karaoke. The other thing is that, yeah, I got really nostalgic because me personally, I had experience as a youngster, as a 16-year-old student, you know, who started touching the media on the local radio station. So things like came together really nicely. So I was like up for it and said like, yeah, let's do this. And that was the end of 2022. And then in 2023, basically, I officially stepped up as a so-called chief editor of Radio ETER. And the main turning point that I did is I turned the focus from the idea of the traditional radio station into the podcast platform. And that was this big shift, yeah, which was mainly organizational shift, but that's how we made it sustainable. And I will show you now how. Yeah. 2026 is this year, and as Laimonas mentioned, yeah, Radio ETER got its permanent studio space in this amazing, beautiful, humongous youth center on 2,000 square meters, like 4 floors in the center of the capital city of Slovenia, Ljubljana. Please feel free to come around and visit. And yeah, so that's another era, I believe, you know, for the potential that was all of a sudden given as well. So we have a permanent space in the center of the city, 2026. What means a little bit in facts and numbers? Yeah, so per year we include or engage like 40 to 50 young people. This is a photo from one of our so-called boot camps, which is like intense 6 hours workshop where you as a young person can come with the idea for your podcast or without the idea of your podcast, and you experience the whole process from, so to say, from the idea to the recording and also distributing and promoting your podcast. Yeah. And then you have a platform where can you also make this happen, which is Radio ETER for you. Yeah. It's hard to engage 40 to 50 young people per year, extremely hard. So again, we will have to change our ways of doing it because things then just stop working as you think. What it's important as well, because that was in the preps that Laimonas mentioned as well, you know, and I will emphasize that the whole operation, yes, I am the creative coordinator, but the process of production is mentored by young mentors. Yeah, so like the guy in the middle of the photo, Gregor, he's assistant to an editor, but his role it is to be a mentor to newcomers, to new people that come. Yeah, so he's not a youth worker. It's not a youth worker who is doing that. He's basically a student who was at the initial, quite quickly after initial launch of so Radio Besmet at the time he joined. So he's the only one who stayed there. Yeah, he's freelance journalist, so he works also on the national radio station and on some alternative radio stations. So he has like quite a wide range of approaching to media. And he is the one who is in contact and he is supporting the young people. And I think that's really important as well. So it's like peer-to-peer, so to say, learning and processing. If you wonder what are we talking about, what are the themes and formats, we are open to everything. What it's important is that it comes from young people, you know. So that's the role that I hold as a creative coordinator or editor, is that I help young people to facilitate their idea. So there is no pushing of the ideas, what they should talk about and how they should talk about. Yes, it needs to be in compliance with the values of the youth work and the values of the youth center at the end of the day. But really, really open. I'll show you later a little bit exactly how open. And what is also important, so the fourth point of Radio ETER is continuous development. As I mentioned, this photo comes from the boot camps that we were doing in 2024 and 2025. And last time we already discovered that, probably it would be good to change again a bit how we approach to young people, that's another story, how we position the boot camps to actually match a different interests of young people. So for somebody, the idea was that the bootcamp is actually audition to participate at Radio ETER. For some of them, it was like just a workshop how to make a podcast, To some of them was like, oh yeah, I want to step on the stage. I want to be, on the stage in front of the microphone. I want to perform, So we really tapped in different, so to say, personas, and we managed to attract lots of young people at that time. But yeah, then we also found out that reality check hit in, so what it actually means, then to do that. But it's fine. It's like giving the space to actually try it, so learning by doing, try it, and you can't fail. Wait a second, some window popped up over my screen. Okay, I'm back. I can't emphasize enough that the ethos, it's really important. I think in general, in youth work at the end of the day, and it needs to transfer into all fields of youth work, by my opinion. And Radio ETER, it's operating in the field of youth work, and it needs to hold this same ethos that, Radio ETER is the voice of young people, full stop. And as I said, like, there is no pushing the agendas of what we want them to talk about. No, we help them to find their voice, to help them to find what they want to talk about, if they don't know yet. Okay, so why? Why doing podcasts? Why making podcasts? Why to think about podcasts in youth work at all? It is a tool. I see it as a tool, to connect with young people who might be interested in that, It is a creative space then for young people, So I see it, I don't know, in traditional way, I would say like, it's a DIY workshop where we will make collages from old magazines, to express ourselves. Well, here you can make podcast or try to make podcast, to express yourself. And it's a tool then, to engage young people, just to give them this option, really, And on the topic of support, I was thinking a lot, that I see this support not so much from the perspective of supporting young people, but supporting also the youth work itself, because we use the podcast also to, at the end of the day, promote the programs and topics that are important for for youth work and are happening in the youth work field, So there would be the event on mental health of young people, and we will try to find a young person who would cover that event with the report, for example, the themes to talk about are already around you, around us. They are always there, So it's how to then match these things together. And from the same perspective, I also see the podcast can be a catalyst, to get the ideas across and to promote youth work at the end of the day, because it's still, underappreciated, unseen as it should be. And I think that we all should work towards that, for better recognition of the impact of youth work as well. Okay, formats. So what formats do we use? And as I said, like, we are open to formats. The most common format, of course, at least by my experience, is that people think of conversation. So you're gonna be a host and you're going to have guests and you're going to talk to the guests. Yeah, from my point of view, that's one option. Yeah. The other option, or that's more even an interview. The conversation I had in mind, like we have a show that it's called What About Now? That are actually two youngsters who are a couple, and they are talking amongst themselves about life challenges on these, how do you say, on the, at the time when they are becoming adults. Yeah, so going from this youth to the adult life, and what are the challenges that they come across and what are they thinking about, and they have like this contradictory views. Like one of them is a media student, the other one is medical student, and they are like having that conversation. I mentioned reports as a format, like reports from events, for example. Then in this area, it's also reviews of the concerts, for example. Yeah. And as I mentioned, like being a registered media in Slovenia, we can also sometimes, or at least we can help to get a press pass for some concert. So you as a young person actually can get a press pass and you can go on the concert like with the press ticket, and then you prepare the review of the concert, which again we use a couple of times when there were like concerts inside the youth centers. Yeah, so Young Dragons, they have the concerts as a part of the youth center program. So then we connected the young creators, and the young musicians, and they actually then prepared like the insight into the backstage, and then the concert performance as well. So good. When I mention events over here, I think it's very interesting thing as well to use a podcast as a part of your event. For example, there is a program in one of youth centers that it's promoting alternative sports. In that, so that's a kind of, let's call it, festival of alternative sports or non-competitive sports. Yeah, so non-competitive sports. And as a part of that, there were podcasts, in front of the live audience, with certain athletes, that were interesting to young people, because the program of the sports festival also was created with young people. So, for example, that is how you can involve it in the event. And on the other hand, like Young Dragons, they have every year actually the international conference on the youth mental health. And what we do is we set up a podcast studio in one of the hotel rooms at the time of the conference. And then we invite people, either like speakers or even participants, to join for a podcast recording. And that's how we then document, the topics that are talked there. And so, for example, because that's the beauty of the podcast, you can take it wherever you want. And the format that's mentioned here as well is freestyle. Yeah, for example, like really, I'm still looking for some experimental sound form to turn up. But we had the radio play, for example, of a person who first time experienced the Erasmus exchange. And it was hilarious, so 8 minutes of internal monologues and like schizophrenic show of like all the people that actually were evoked in her, by this experience. So it was fantastic. And the other experiment or freestyle was also a student of psychotherapy was asking listeners to submit the description of their dreams. And then she would interpret their dreams, so it was called the Archive of Dreams. So from the perspective of the student of psychoanalysis, so it was really fun as well. Okay, creating content is one part of podcast, and then you have other parts as well, which is producing, editing, promoting. And I would just like put a point here that, engaging and trying to involve and motivate young people to do podcasts. It's not only about creating content. Somebody might be interested in editing and can do editing only. Also, that's possible. A few practicalities, what also Laimonas asked, to be concrete what it means, so actually to be able to do a podcast. So I just prepared a few of pointers here, how we do it, So we have a website platform, which is built on Wix. It costs us approx 50 euros per month. The hosting and distributing, we use so-called Transistor FM media player, which is plugin into the website, like really easily. And you upload the episode in this media player, and from there, it's automatically distributed to Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. And I think that's really important as well. So to be on these main platforms, because that gives you credibility as well. We use Discord as an internal communication among the creators and editing team and mentors. Instagram is our main promoting tool. Online, otherwise all the youth centers are the promoting tool, so through the youth centers, you get in touch with young people. I didn't mention Audacity as an editing tool, but I know that Rob will have that later. And yeah, so just the range of the equipment as well. And basically you can record podcast with your phone. You don't need much really to do that. And for example, equipment that we have a range of it, but just to give you the price range, like these LARC microphones, they are mostly used by social media creators and they work fantastically. We just use them to cover one event. You could use them with a smartphone, super easy. The new thing that we just got is this Sennheiser wireless microphone system, which is like a MacGyver. It has like all what you need actually. So, and if it was my starting point right now in an uncertain vision of how to fund it or where it will go as a vision, the podcast creation, I would go with that, because for 240 euros, you have a professional sound for all sorts of options. So that's really cool thing. But yeah, we also have all of this equipment, which is basically a professional top-notch equipment that professional podcasters would use as well. And also this, as you can see, it's not, you don't need to rob a bank, to also do this. So you really have options in this range. And finally, the last thing, but not the least thing, the challenges that we are constantly in front of are, of course, engaging young people and finding the ways, how to grab their attention. And I think that through building some relationships through the youth centers, through the youth workers, when you are in contact with young people, it's of course the best way, like one-to-one, person-to-person. Because that's not only the youth sector's problem, it's the challenge of today, I think. It is to grab the attention of young people and then let alone keep them interested and in focus. So I always say that if we manage to interest one person, we won, so one person counts, so if one young person experience what it means to make a podcast and find that as a way of expressing themselves, I think that's the winner,